Hey, it's your boy Yellow Sheldon. I'm here to talk about bonded frames. So, get a cup of coffee and sit down and relax and listen to your favorite banana and talk about other things that are oh so sweet. I have a ripping headache tonight, so, there'll be more brain farts than usual. However, I pulled down the Colnago bitube cyclocross frame. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to my main men in Italy, my my favorite chromosome Stallones up there in the old country, who have been fighting the good fight for a good long time. So you might remember the other night I was laying on the floor bitching about the bike industry and saying that I had originally intended on making a video about bonded aluminum frames, specifically from the company Elan. Well, tonight's the night you actually get to watch that video. So Elan is an Italian company. They were, I believe, started in 1972 or 73, somewhere thereabouts, by an ex-engineer from Torpedo. The main deal with these is that they use a completely unique to them method of fixing the frame tubes together, which is a lot more durable, and in my opinion creates a superior product. So one thing people always ask is, how do you pronounce it? Is it Elan? Is it Allen? What is it? The answer to that is it doesn't really matter. I say Elan, mostly because it's a portmanteau of aluminum anodized. So it's not a real word. It's not like the owner of the company's name or even the engineer. The engineer was named Ludovico Falconi. It's just aluminum anodized. So, say it how you want, just like Mavic or Mavic. So yeah, we're in the early 70s, coming up with new tech, and this MFer comes up with what has been called glued and screwed by people in the know. So, if you're not familiar with how a traditional classic bonded frame works, I will let you know. Let's move the tripod forward a little bit and take a look at this. So, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but mostly in the 70s and 80s, a lot of companies saw the utility of building a bike out of a high-grade aircraft aluminum. However, they weren't necessarily able to weld them efficiently. The technology to make a repeatable aluminum frame that was cost-effective was somewhere in the distance. And so, much like the early days of carbon fiber, they figured their best bet was to glue the things together, right? So, let's say you have a different brand. I'm thinking of you, Raleigh. They had their technium frames. There's also a French manufacturer. They were like a tubing manufacturer. I'll think of their name in a second. But so the way these companies work is it's exactly like a lugged steel frame, except they're using different materials. So the same basic premise is at play. You've got tubes that are mitered and stuck together inside of lugs. So a lug, this is an example of a bottom bracket lug. You see the seam here and here and there and there. So a lugged frame is just a support structure. A lug is a support structure which holds together individual tubes. Whether it's a steel bike or a bonded aluminum bike or carbon fiber bike that's built in this way, all you're using is glue to hold the tubes together. So in the case of steel lugged bikes, what you have is a steel tube, a steel tube, a steel lug, and then you're basically like sweat fitting a lower melting point metal into the space in between the tubes. So on really high end custom bikes, it's silver. Silver has a really nice low melting point, so you don't have as much of heat affected zones torching the metal. On most bikes, though, it's just brass. And so what you do is you put a bunch of flux all over your tubes and lugs, and you heat them up to the requisite temperature needed to sort of melt and bond the brazing material. You take your rod of brass and you just sort of touch it to the tubes where they're really hot, And through capillary action, just like a candle wick, the spaces inside of the lugs will actually suck the brass or silver in. And when it hardens, I mean, it's not thought of this way by a lot of people, but it's fucking glue. Like, solder or brazing is just glue. It's metal glue. So all you're getting with a bonded frame like this is the same exact construction, but instead of using, despite some late night TV show infomercials, I don't think you can actually effectively braze aluminum in the same way that you can braze steel. So rather than using silver or brass, they're using an aerospace epoxy, basically like a two-part glue that you mix the two pieces together, and they will set up to an incredibly hard, durable, strong adhesive. So same process. They're mitering the tubes. They are coating the ends of the tubes, or maybe the inside of the lugs, in their adhesive, and they're sticking the thing together in a jig, and then they're letting the glue cure, right? So pretty smart. Problem is that a lot of the bikes that were made in this way were less than reliable. They come unbonded. There's this thing called galvanic corrosion. So like certain materials, when interacting with each other and with epoxy, will they'll sort of galvanize and like lose ions, is how I think it was explained to me. And eventually what you have is like a breakdown of that adhesion. You have like material missing, and the frame will then fall apart. So I think Craig Calfee has written a couple articles about why he chooses to use titanium for his lugs and dropouts. You know, you have less of a chance of that galvanic corrosion, or maybe no chance of it at all, when you use titanium. So they're not using titanium, they're using aluminum. Stuff comes unglued. The genius about the Alans is that they are using a chemical bond, like a chemical adhesive bond, as well as a mechanical bond. So on these guys, what you have is a tube that is threaded going into a lug that is also threaded. And so, you know, you're coating your threads in a big blob of epoxy, and you are physically threading together the lug and the tubes, as well as gluing them together with the epoxy. So, you know, I'm not very big. I'm like a 5'7" little Asian manlet. However, I find that these are very, very durable. You know, I've had about 3 of these style of frames over the years. I had one actual Elan. It was, I don't know, the master record or whatever. It had sort of indigo blue tubes with silver lugs. I have had 2 Gucciottis, which were made by Elan. Sorry, not all Gucciottis were made by Elan, but the aluminum cyclocross ones were made by Elan. I had one road bike and one cyclocross bike from them, and they had bright red anodized tubes and polished lugs again. And they were incredibly durable. They went through many crashes, races, all kinds of stuff without falling apart. I sort of have an implicit trust of this construction method. Now, you know, let's talk about some downsides. So, if you're gigantic, and everybody's gigantic from my perspective, but if you're gigantic, these are probably not the best frames for you. So, like, let's say you're like 6 foot and above. Aluminum, despite what it is known as in the cycling industry in 2018, is not very stiff. It's really not stiff. It's downright soft. And so, you know, the bad name that aluminum gets in terms of stiffness is directly down to people like Klein and the Cannondale Company making tubes that were this frickin' big around. Just big old chodas of tubes. And why did they do that? Well, if you know why we make tubes bigger in structures, it's to increase stiffness. So, you know, for a given material, you increase the tube diameter and get the wall thickness down, you're gonna radically improve the stiffness of the frame. So those huge tubes were an attempt to combat the inherent noodliness of plain like traditional steel diameter aluminum bikes. So much so that, you know, it's kind of a forgotten thing in bicycling history, but the ad copy for a lot of the early bonded bikes, specifically Raleigh Technium, they were touting the stiffness of steel with the comfort and compliance of aluminum. Now, when's the last time you heard someone refer to an aluminum bike as compliant and comfortable? Don't get me wrong, I actually prefer an oversized aluminum tubed bike. I just require that it have gigantic tires. Like if I'm going to ride, like my Cannondales they all have like 47C tires on them because, you know, I'm an old man now and I just want my ass to not hurt. So, Elan was making a lot of frames by contract for a lot of different companies. You know, some of the ones off the top of my head that you'll come in contact with the most are Colnagos. I've seen a few Gitans in my day. Guerciotti, of course, I've owned 2 of them. And then they made them under their own brand name as well. I think there was like a Belgian company that they made them for. Basically, you would say, I want aluminum frames, and they would put your stickers on them and build you kind of whatever you wanted. This particular one is quite special. Colnago, for a while, was sort of dicking around with this idea that they should make their bicycles have double down tubes. I've never ridden one of these, and this one has some damage, so no one's ever going to ride this one again. But I think it would probably improve the ride of these bikes. You know, rather than have a, let's say, 1.125" single tube, much like the down tube here, running from the head tube down to the bottom bracket, you know, they've essentially done the same thing as what is known as biaxially ovalizing. So when you biaxially ovalize a tube, you know, at the head tube, you've squashed the tube to cover more of the head tube. You've made it vertically taller. And then you squish it the opposite direction down at the bottom bracket. So this tube is squashed flat and covers most of the bottom bracket shell. It really, really increases stiffness on a frame. They're doing it here by sort of making these 2 struts that run the entire length of the down tube. So look, it's edge to edge at the bottom bracket area. Yeah, there was a lot of bonded frames over the years. I think there was one called like the Titan Teledyne, and then there was the like Graphtec graphite frame. A lot of these frames didn't survive. We hardly ever see examples of them unless they were kept by a collector. They're all just broken. Not only have I seen a ton of Elans over the years, I've seen a ton of them that are just used for fucking commuter bikes. People just like the way they ride and ride them every day. This one is, I can't even describe how pretty this is, and I would have conned the owner into selling it to me if it was rideable. I mean, it's my size. It's 100% my size, and it is a fucking dream bike. I'll show you some of the details. So, first off, it's hard to miss the double down tubes. Just gonna pan this up a little bit. You see how cool that is? Well, there's a small brace here at the top. And down here, we have 2 more small braces for the water bottle holder. You have cantilever studs right there. You have flats squashed into the tubing here and here and on the outside here. The outside one is for like chainring and crank clearance, and the inside one is for tire clearance. We have our dropouts. Gorgeous dropouts done in that same Elan style. You will see pretty much no matter who the mark that they were manufacturing these for, these sort of chamfered holes. You're always going to see these on Elans. Even the track ones had these stylistic little touches. Bottom bracket shell. Nice little Colnago C on both sides. The most colorful Colnago decals that you'll ever see. And that's saying something for Colnago. Just beautiful. Fork is of the traditional Elan cyclocross style. You've got the top pantoed there, pantographed. It has the same, what are they, bolted on? I actually think these are bolted on. If I remember correctly, and I could be wrong about this, but if I remember correctly, the cantilever stud, see how it's got wrench flats on it? It actually passes through this block and threads into a receiver in the fork blades. These are not very stiff, but this one is way stiffer than the Guerciotti version that I had. Look up above here. we have our nice colnago head tube, a little pantographing there, and really this example is in beautiful shape. We have our top routed cables so that you can shoulder this bike when you're running across or carrying the bike through a barrier or obstacle in a cyclocross race. And the rear junction of the seat stays and that lug there. Nice little colnago pantograph. The last detail that I'll show is that you have the same sort of chamfered relieved hole for the seat post clamp. And you always have to put a hole at the bottom of your cut for your seat post clamp, because having a round termination of this means that there's not going to be like a nice square like stress riser, which is going to cause the frame to crack when you repeatedly squish this over and over and over again. So yeah, you didn't have to make it this big or this chamfered or cool, but goddamn it, they did. Other ones that I have enjoyed over the years are probably a lot of the techniums. Now, techniums are bullshit because they're not lighter than a traditional bike, and they're not stiffer. They're not anything. They're just really, really neat. I've had some Miatas that were made in the same way, where you're just gluing together different materials. They're basically like throwing noodles against a wall to see if they stick. The camera's not picking this up, but I wish you could see that if you're familiar with sort of the pearlescent rainbow anodization that was on a lot of early Dura-Ace cranks. So if you had like Dura-Ace, 7700, 7400, they had this rainbow pink, blue, pearlescent color to them. This frame, the lugs, actually the whole damn thing has that same sort of pearlescence to it. So it's really gorgeous. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about this. If you find an Elan, obviously squeeze the rear triangle, squeeze the fork, give it a little twist, make sure nothing's coming undone. But I would say pick it up if it's your size, provided you're a reasonable sized human being and not some giant. They're very comfortable. The cyclocross ones make great around town bikes. They're always sure to catch an eye. They're rust proof. And they last forever, provided you don't crash into walls and stuff with them. So that was my little short, long, short, shorty McLong video on this colnago made by the Italian company Elan. Thanks for watching. You know the drill. Subscribe, share these videos, do whatever, jerk off to them if you like. I appreciate you watching. And yeah, keep coming back. I'm trying to do a video every single time I'm at work, if not 2 of them. So yeah, if you like this content, there's plenty more to come. Have a good night. Bye-bye.